Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And we're going to continue talking about our featured work of literature for the month of October, the novel A Room with a View by the English writer E.M. Forster, and it was published way back in 1908. And yeah, even though they didn't have the internet then and they didn't have smartphones and stuff like that, it's still an interesting story. It's got romance, it's got rivalry, it's got class, and I'm sure it's a good read that you all should consider reading.
It's got murder, too. Yeah, so today we're going to spend some time on the themes, at least the dominant themes, the stronger themes in A Room with a View, and also talk a bit about E.M. Forster, who's a very, very famous, very accomplished author. Of course, he's already gone. He lived a long time ago. Let's get started. We'll read through day 2 now. The dominant themes in A Room with a View are society and class, love, and women's roles. At the time, British society was undergoing a transformation from strict Victorian social norms to a more progressive and liberal way of thinking. The conservative upper-class characters, like Charlotte and Cecil, have contempt for the less wealthy Emersons, as they're characterized as free-thinking, modern, and improper. Lucy nearly surrenders to the conventional guidelines demanded of someone of her class and sex by agreeing to marry Cecil. While it would be the rational choice, it would condemn her to an unequal marriage, lacking affection, as dull as vacationing in a room without a view. For most of the novel, Lucy tries to deceive herself about her love for George. She eventually gains more independence and rejects the role expected of her as a woman, becoming merely Cecil's wife. As a modern woman, she asserts her ability to make her own decisions. Besides A Room with a View, E.M. Forster is best known for the 1910 novel Howard's End and the 1924 novel A Passage to India. Many of his works are about changing social conditions as the Victorian era declined. At King's College, Cambridge, he enjoyed a sense of liberation and individuality. He gained an appreciation for the liberal culture of the Mediterranean, in contrast to the constraints of British culture. He traveled to Italy, India, and Egypt, and devoted his life to composing fiction and essays. Queen Elizabeth II made Forster a Companion of Honor in 1953 and a member of the Order of Merit in 1969.
Okay, everybody, let's dive right into our lesson for today and talk about some of the themes and ideas in our featured novel, A Room with a View. So again, it's a choice between romance and tradition in this novel, and the dominant themes in A Room with a View are society and class, and love, I suppose romance with that, and women's roles. So those are basically the themes there: society and class, love, and women's roles. Those are some good themes that are still valid today.
They are, and you're just going to see them from a different perspective, of course. They were struggling with this back then, and it sounds like some people are still struggling with this today. So at the time, British society was changing, was undergoing a transformation. To undergo something just means you're going through something. To undergo a change, to undergo I don't know, you could use it with different things. To undergo, what do you usually undergo? Undergo an operation. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're having surgery on your body, you would undergo that. So it just means you're experiencing something, you're going through something. Usually it's unpleasant. It's painful, or it's kind of hard. So they were undergoing a huge transformation because Victorian social norms, the rules, during Queen Victoria's time were very strict. And I think they were so strict that people would quietly break the rules. and try to get away with things. But yeah, it was quite strict back then. And she was queen for a very long time. I think Queen Elizabeth II has now been queen longer. But Queen Victoria was a queen for a long time. She was made queen as a young girl.
Yeah, and to me, the Victorian era is basically the 1800s, okay? Give or take a couple of years or decades there, but basically when I hear of Victorian times, I think of the 1800s. So we had social norms during that time, and these social norms were undergoing, a transformation. Okay, they were changing, at least British society was changing. They were becoming less uptight than they were during the Victorian era, and they were kind of lightening up a little bit. You might meet British people nowadays and think, boy, these people are pretty uptight, but if you think they are uptight now, imagine what they were like during the Victorian times. And so, indeed, they were changing, and they were trying to lighten up and become a little bit more, easygoing and things like that, not so strict. So, yes, there was this transformation between those two norms. And norms, of course, just refers to normal expectations in a society. They were becoming more progressive and more liberal. Progressive means you're willing to accept change. You're not stuck in your old ways so much. That's kind of what liberal thinking is all about as well. And, of course, the opposite of liberal usually is conservative.
Right. So the conservative people were the upper class characters in the book, like Charlotte and Cecil. If you're conservative, you like to keep rules as they are, not change things too much. You still hold true to your values and your attitudes. And we use these two words a lot in politics, especially conservative, progressive, liberal. Those are words you'll see in the newspaper a lot. Well, these upper class characters were conservative. They wanted to keep those social norms intact or in place. They didn't want things to loosen up or change too quickly. They probably felt like those social norms were just great the way they were. So these upper class characters have contempt for the less wealthy Emersons. Remember, the Emersons are a lower class. I wouldn't say they're low class. I would just say they're probably not that upper class. They aren't quite as wealthy. They were born into a different class level. If you have contempt for somebody, you feel that they're kind of worthless. You kind of look down on them. You scorn them. It's not a nice word to have contempt for someone. And they just, both Charlotte and Cecil just thought, oh, the Emersons, they're too lower class. We're so much better than they are. That was kind of the attitude they have. But the Emersons, they were pretty fun. They were free thinking. They didn't just hold on to the social norms. They wanted to expand their minds. They were free thinking. They listened to other people's opinions. They were modern, but here's the last word. They were improper. Why were they improper? Because they broke those strict Victorian social norms, the rules. They just kind of went, they're not so important. We're going to do what we feel is right. So they were kind of free thinking. And of course, that led to these upper class people looking down on them even more.
Right. I wouldn't say the upper class hated them, but contempt just means a great deal of disrespect. And as you said, you're looking down your nose at them. You feel you're superior to them, etc. And again, the Emersons are more free-thinking, modern, but they are improper. They don't do what they're supposed to do. And Lucy nearly surrenders to the conventional guidelines demanded of someone of her class and sex by agreeing to marry Cecil. So basically, this sentence says that Lucy almost marries this rich guy. She almost stays within her social class there, but she changes her mind at the last minute. So that's why it says she nearly surrenders to these conventional guidelines, these traditional rules. She almost agrees to them. And of course, these guidelines or these rules are demanded of someone of her class. If you want to be in the upper class, you've got to obey these rules. If you start hanging out with these Emerson people and going to pubs and listening to the Beatles and blues music from America and stuff like that, well, then you're not going to be welcome in the upper class anymore.
I want to give you an example of how George broke the Victorian social norms. Girls back then were not supposed to kiss guys, especially if they weren't engaged. But even after they were engaged, they might kiss their fiancé once before they got married. So George kisses her twice. Once, she's not engaged to Cecil at that point, and the second time she's already engaged to another man. So that's really improper.
A no-no.
Yeah, so while it would be the rational choice to go ahead and marry the person who is traditionally somebody she would be married to, and that's Cecil, the jerk, yeah, she just feels like, wow, my whole marriage would be lacking affection. It would be hard for me to do that sort of thing. If something's rational, guys, it means you use your mind. It makes sense. You use reason, logic. You're thinking clearly. Now, if something's irrational, then you do something that makes no sense to people around you. So they're seeing here that that's the rational choice to marry Cecil. I was laughing with Tom. I think that's irrational to marry Cecil. But back then, their social norms were very, very strong and very strict. So for her and the way she was raised, she should have married Cecil. That was the one that made sense.
Exactly, and I suppose she was thinking, well, maybe he'll change later on in the marriage. I'd rather be married to a rich guy, and then maybe later on he'll mellow out and not be so uptight anymore, and he'll let me pursue my own dreams and things like that, and he won't demand that I'm a housewife or something. Fat chance that's not going to happen, but in any case here, it would have been easy to make the rational choice, but it would have condemned her to an unequal marriage lacking affection, as dull as vacationing in a room without a view. And we all want to have a room with a view. We don't want to be in the room that doesn't have any windows. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天跟大家介绍了 A Room with a View 窗外有蓝天这个作品。其实这个窗外有蓝天它的一个 themes， 它的主题其实就是跟 society and class, love, women's roles, 爱情啊、女性角色啊、社会阶级这些是很有这个绝对的关联性。我们来看一下第一段第3句这个地方。我们刚刚说到的轻视用的是 contempt 这个字。 contempt 如果当名词，如果其实在名词的情况之下，它通常会搭配的是 have contempt for something， 轻视某人。那么除了这个片语很重要之外，逗点之后的 as 我们说过了， as 如果当连接词就是 because, when 或如同好像的意思。在这里的逗点之后的 as 当连接词是 because 因为。为什么这些上流阶级的人要轻视 Emerson 父子呢？ Because as 因为他们是被标为自由思想啦，很现代啦，甚至是 improper 比较没有礼貌啦，不成体统啊之类的。好，所以 Lucy 当然当时也是一个上流社会的人啊，她也不敢，那当然就是同意跟 Cecil 结婚，而且当时几乎就是屈服在这种阶级性别就是被要求的一种传统的准则当中。我们同样也接着看一下第4句。第4句出现了向什么什么投降 surrender to someone or something。 不过 Lucy 是向什么投降呢？是向传统的一些规则，传统的一些教条。同样出现了一个简化的关系子句哦，先行词我们就直接画起来 the conventional guidelines， 后面demanded 到 sex 这里可以左右括号，它是关系子句的一个简化，省略的是 that 或者是 which 跟 are。 那么 demand 就有要求啊，后面的 of 其实是 from 的意思。当然这些所谓的传统的准则，传统的规范是从哪个人那边要求做到的，所以用的是被动式。好，那么后面就是因为Lucy 有投降了， Lucy 这样子的一个 承认了，所以借由 agreeing to marry Cecil 这个方式 by 后面加动词 ing 就有借由什么什么方法之意。好，那当然在当时是一个非常理性的选择咯。不过如果她真的是嫁给了 Cecil， 我们知道她是一个控制欲很强，而且是很传统保守的轻视女性的一个人物，那就会迫使她处于一种缺乏爱情的不平等的婚姻当中，就好像没有风景的房间里面，如果你在那里度假，你会觉得很乏味。同样在第一段当中，我们看一下第五句。第五句的第一个字的 while， 注意是连接词 although 的意思，不是 when。那我们要怎么分辨呢？同样也只能够靠句子当中上下文的文意去推断它。所以 while 在这里是 although 的意思。虽然这是个理性的选择，但是却会让 Lucy 进入一种强迫她到一种请划线An unequal marriage， 一个不平等的婚姻，后面出现关系子句的简化，两个字 lacking affection。lacking 原本应该还原成为 which 或者是 that lacks， 这个婚姻是缺乏着爱情的。逗点之后 as 两个字可以抓出来，它是用比喻的方式来修饰前面 dull， 像什么样一样的无聊呢？第二个 as 是介系词，如同好像，就好像在没有 view 的房间度假一样的无聊 as dull as vacationing in a room without a view.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about A Room with a View, some of the themes in the book. We're going to move on. We learned that there's a lot of discussion in this book, or a lot of themes that keep coming up in this book about women's roles and about social norms, about class interaction in society, what the expectations for society were back then. It would have been tough. I'm too much of a free thinker, and I don't like to be told what to do. So living back in the Victorian era would have been a little bit tough for me. Plus, if women needed to keep their mouth shut, they couldn't argue or defend themselves. And that would have been hard for me because I would talk back to people, I think. So moving on, we learned that Lucy is trying to talk herself into marrying Cecil, which is the rational choice, at least for people in her social class. But she really doesn't want to, be imprisoned in a marriage where there's just no love and she's just seen as a servant.
Right, it says here she tries to deceive herself about her love for George. In other words, she just won't admit that she's really in love with George. She just won't admit that, and she still thinks the rational thing to do is to marry Cecil. So that's what happens throughout most of the novel. If you deceive someone, or if you deceive yourself, you kind of fool them. You present them with false information so that they believe something that isn't true. So yes, you might try to deceive your classmates, for example. If you really don't want to go with them to the ocean and go swimming, you just kind of say, well, I've got something to do with my family. You deceive them even though you don't have something to do with your family, but you just don't want to go to the ocean. You don't know how to swim. You're afraid of the water and stuff like that. And so here she just kind of lies to herself about her love for George. Oh, I don't really like him. It's just that we had a nice conversation, but I really love Cecil. She's kind of lying to herself.
She really is. Notice when Tom changed that verb to lies, you had to add the extra to, tries to lie to herself. But with deceive, you just say tries to deceive herself. I thought that was interesting. Some of the crazy things about English grammar. Now, she eventually gains or adds or, achieves more independence and rejects the role expected of her as a woman back then. And what is expected of her? To become merely or only Cecil's wife, she'll be nothing else. She won't be known for any talent she has or something that she's accomplished on her own. Some of the women back then, if they wanted to write novels or poetry, had to write them using a man's name in order to get them published. So life has changed a lot for us these days. So as a modern woman, she asserts her ability to make her own decisions. Yeah, to assert something back then was a big deal. That meant you had enough confidence to say, no. I'm not going to do that. This is what I want. To assert yourself is to show some confidence in what you want and to tell people that they can't just decide things for you. To assert her ability. So she's stating something or her belief very forcefully, very confidently. She asserts her ability to make her own decisions. So instead of letting her parents decide who she's going to marry, which often happened, she's going to decide for herself. Again, merely, guys, can either mean just or only. So there's nothing beyond being Cecil's wife that she would ever achieve if she married him.
Right, and this word assert, of course, is useful in your career. If you're working at a company, whether you're a man or a woman, and you want to get ahead in the company, if you want to get promoted, you need to assert yourself. You need to talk to the boss about getting promoted. You can't just sit around waiting for it to happen. So you can either assert yourself or you can be assertive. So remember, it's up to you to do that, and that's what she's doing here. She asserts her ability to make her own decisions. She lets other people know that she's capable of this. She doesn't wait for them to ask her if she has this ability. She lets them know right away.
Please be careful. I hear people in business using aggressive when they really mean assertive. If you're aggressive, it has that feeling. The feeling to the word means you're being kind of violent. You know, you'll push people out of the way. Assertive is very positive. Aggressive becomes negative sometimes, so be careful with that. Moving on to the final paragraph, it says, besides A Room with a View, E.M. Forster, our author, is best known for the 1910 novel Howard's End and the 1924 novel A Passage to India. If you look those two books up, you'll find that movies were made from those novels. So those are two you might see. I haven't seen A Passage to India. It kind of got some bad reviews because it was so long, but I did see Howard's End, and it's very good.
Yeah, I believe Anthony Hopkins was in that movie, Howard's End, with Vanessa Redgrave. But also, this movie, A Room with a View, came out in late 1985. And let's see, who was in that movie? I can't really remember some of the actors and actresses I'm not familiar with. I think Daniel Day-Lewis was in that, and Judi Dench was in that in smaller roles. But in any case, yes, E.M. Forster, I guess, was quite a talented writer because his novels have been made into novels. Excuse me, his novels have been made into movies in the last several decades. But again, back to the story here, we're talking about Lucy. She gets more independent. She doesn't just want to be Cecil's wife. She asserts her ability to make her own decisions. And again, besides A Room with a View, the author here is known for the 1910 novel Howard's End and in 1924 A Passage to India. And many of his works are about changing social conditions as the Victoria era declined. So yeah, it's the early 1900s, so they were kind of gradually saying goodbye to the Victorian era. And at King's College, Cambridge, he enjoyed a sense of liberation and individuality. Again, we're talking about the writer here. He attended King's College, which is part of Cambridge there, and he had a sense of liberation, which means you feel free after being kind of imprisoned. And individuality, of course, is recognizing yourself versus everybody else.
Right. He also gained an appreciation for liberal culture. He did a lot of traveling. He said he liked the liberal culture of the Mediterranean. We're talking about Egypt and Italy. When we say that, he traveled to those countries, and he devoted his life to composing fiction or writing novels of fiction, and he liked essays too, where he could write his thoughts and feelings. Now, Queen Elizabeth II, the current queen, she made Forster a Companion of Honor in 1953. This is an honor that is only in the UK, and the Queen has to give it to you. And he's also a member of the Order of Merit, and he was awarded that honor in 1969. Again, it's a British honor that is only bestowed or given by the Queen to the person who earns that honor.
Yeah, this is kind of something that sounds optimistic for me. The Mediterranean culture, Italy and places like that, they seem to be more laid back there, and they don't suffer from those constraints or restrictions of British culture. I'm sure the Brits are better nowadays, but still, who doesn't want to hang out with the Italians and have some wine and pizza and spaghetti and just have the time of your life? I think that was a good choice of his to travel to the Mediterranean. And that wraps up our lesson for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
那么当然在小说的大部分的篇幅当中 Lucy 都是一直不断的蒙蔽自己对 George 的爱，可是她最后呢还是获得了很多的自主性 independence， 而且拒绝她身为女性当时被预期的一种角色，也就是跟 Cecil 结婚。所以她其实已经在当时就成为了一个成功的现代女性，她维护自己做决定的那种能力。好，我们在同样第一段的地方，在第7句我们特别注意一下，有一个简化的关系子句哦。先行词是 the role， 那个角色，什么角色呢？后面 expected 到句尾可以左右括号。好，省略的是 which 或 that 跟 be 动词的 is。而最后面第8句第一个单字的 as 呢，则是介系词，身为作为，身为现代女性，她就维护了自己做决定的能力。好，那当然 E.M. Forster 他是很有名的英国小说家，除了窗外有蓝天之外啊，当时其他的作品包括有1910年的 Howard's End 霍德华庄园，还有1924年 A Passage to India 印度之旅。那么他的作品通常都是描述随着维多利亚时代的衰落改变的一个状态。本身呢，他对于这种小说跟散文，就是毕生都致力于这样子的一个创作。我们在第2段最后第5句的地方特别注意一个动词 devote to， devoted his life to something。to 是介系词哦，不过我们通常会说 devote his life 或者是 devote one's life to something， 所以我们也常说 devote 这个字常常会用被动式。或许我们有时间也可以多看一些这些上个世纪很有名的文学作品哦。我们下次见，我是安娜，拜拜。
That's it for today, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we have encouraged you to try to read this novel on your own. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
See ya.